My ex from 15 years ago called me and said, "I need you to donate your kidney to me." I laughed at her. "Ask someone else. Your body hasn't rejected an organ in 15 years anyway." I went to hang up, but she quickly spoke. "It's not for me," her voice cracked. "It's for my son. He's 9, please." I felt bad for maybe 4 seconds. Then I remembered who I was talking to. "Celeste, I'm sorry about your kid, but no, I'm not doing that." She hung up. An hour later, someone knocked on my door. It was Celeste, and my brother Lennox was with her. "We need to talk," Lennox said, pushing past me into my apartment. Celeste followed, crying. "Lennox, what are you doing here?" I asked. "Helping someone who actually needs help," he shot back. They spent the next hour tag-teaming me, Celeste crying about her dying son, Lennox calling me a heartless coward. Every time I asked why he was here, he diverted the subject to me being selfish. Finally, after a million no's, Celeste looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're going to donate whether you like it or not." Over the next week, they kept ambushing me together. I'd be eating lunch, and suddenly Lennox and Celeste would be there, causing a riot in the restaurant and yelling that I was happy to kill a child, loud enough for everyone to judge me. Then Celeste took it further. She showed up at my office, while I was on a Zoom call with the CEO, with the kid beside her, a pale, thin 9-year-old in a hospital mask. My boss was talking about a promotion when she walked him right up to my desk. "This is the man who can save your life," she told the kid, loud enough for everyone to hear. The kid looked at me with huge eyes. "Are you going to save me?" My boss stopped speaking, staring at Celeste, who had her phone out, filming. I felt my face burning. "Celeste, this isn't fair. What's not fair is letting a child die," she said, still filming. She turned to the CEO. "Your worker is choosing to let a child pass away." My boss hung up shortly, and the rumor spread like wildfire. That night, Lennox showed up at my apartment with papers, legal documents. "I talked to a lawyer," he said, spreading them on my kitchen counter. "You can be sued for failure to render aid to a minor. You could face charges." I picked up the papers. They looked official. Court letterhead, legal language, the whole thing. "Just sign the consent form," Lennox said, "or deal with this in court." I told him to get out. The next morning, I was researching these documents when Lennox texted me, "Good luck." Before I could even respond, my doorbell rang. I opened it, and Celeste's entire family barged inside. Her mom, her dad, even her grandmother in a wheelchair. They surrounded me in my own living room. For 5 hours, they took turns. Her mom crying about losing her grandson, her dad yelling about family responsibility. The whole time I kept thinking, how did Lennox know they were coming? Were they dating behind my back? Then Celeste made a GoFundMe. She used my full name and photo. The title was, "Help us convince him to save a dying child." She wrote this whole post about how I was a match but refused to donate. It got shared 617 times in 3 days. My phone wouldn't stop. Friends asking what was happening. My mom calling, crying, asking if it was true. Celeste called me and said, "I'll take down the GoFundMe. Just say yes." I blocked her number. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough. She showed up at my apartment at 3:30 in the morning, sobbing, shaking. She said the doctors gave her son weeks, maybe days. She said she was out of options. She begged me to at least get tested, just to see if I was a real match, and if I wasn't, she'd leave me alone forever. I was exhausted. "Fine, I'll get tested. Then if I'm not a match, you leave me alone." Her whole face changed. She pulled out her phone and texted someone. 8 minutes later, Lennox knocked on my door. He had a testing kit in his hands. They both stood there as I did the cheek swab. Celeste took it and said results would come in 4 days. The results came back. I was a perfect match. But that made no sense. The odds of a non-family member matching were 1 in 20,000. Still, Celeste and Lennox showed up together that same day, celebrating, hugging. Lennox had his hand on her shoulder, rubbing her back. "We can schedule the surgery next week," Celeste said, breathless. "Oh my God, thank you, thank you." "I didn't agree to anything," I said. "But you're a match," Lennox said, almost angry. "You have to do it now. Why do you even care this much?" I asked him directly. "Why are you so involved in her kid's life?" They both went quiet. "How long have you two been together?" I asked. Celeste looked at the floor. Lennox pulled his hand away. 8 years, Lennox finally said. I stared at him. "Is the kid yours?" "That's not your business," Celeste whispered. "Then why is donating a kidney to him my business?" My voice was getting louder. Celeste started crying. Real crying, not the manipulative kind. "Because he's yours." Everything stopped. "What?" "The boy," she said, shaking. "He's your son." "I didn't tell you. Lennox and I started dating right after we broke up. He's been raising him as his own." I looked at Lennox, my brother, who had always known. "You've been hiding my kid from me for 9 years?" I raised my hand to hit him. My arm dropped to my side, but my whole body kept shaking. I couldn't stop staring at Lennox, at this person who looked like my brother, but had been lying to me for 9 years straight. Celeste moved between us with her hands up like she thought I might actually swing. The words kept repeating in my head, over and over. He's yours. Your son. 9 years. I had a kid. A dying kid. And everyone knew except me. Every family gathering, every holiday, every birthday, where I'd been in the same room with my own child and had no idea. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I pointed at my door. Get out. The words came out way louder than I expected, almost a yell that surprised even me. Celeste started crying again, reaching for my arm. Please, we need to talk about this. I jerked away from her touch. I said, get out. Now. She kept trying to talk, kept saying please over and over, but I couldn't hear it anymore. I walked to the door and threw it open so hard it hit the wall. Lennox hadn't moved. He just stood there looking at the floor. I'm sorry, he whispered. Leave. My voice cracked on the word. They finally walked toward the door. Celeste was still crying, still trying to say something, but I turned my back on both of them. The door slammed behind them hard enough that I felt it shake the frame. Then I was alone. I started pacing, back and forth across my living room, then into the kitchen, then back. My mind kept jumping to memories I'd buried. Thanksgiving 3 years ago when Lennox brought his kid, the boy who smiled at me with my own smile. Christmas when the kid opened presents and laughed with my laugh. 4th of July when he ran around the backyard and I thought how much he looked like Lennox. Except he didn't look like Lennox. He looked like me. All those family photos on my mom's wall. All those times I'd ruffled that kid's hair or given him a high five or watched him blow out birthday candles. My son. I'd been standing next to my own son and nobody told me. My hands were still shaking 2 hours later. I couldn't make them stop. How many people knew? Mom had to know. Dad probably knew. Did my other siblings know? My aunts and uncles? Had everyone been in on this except me? Had they all been watching me interact with my own kid and just said nothing? My phone started going crazy around midnight. Text after text lighting up the screen. My mom, my dad, my sister, my brother Marcus, cousins I hadn't talked to in months. The family group chat was exploding. I watched the notifications pile up, but couldn't make myself look at them. Then my mom started calling. The phone rang and rang. I let it go to voicemail. She called again, and again, and again. 14 times she called before I finally answered. Mom. She was crying so hard I could barely understand what she was saying. Is it true? Is Lennox's boy really yours? Her voice was all broken up. I closed my eyes. Yeah, it's true. She made this sound, half sob, half gasp. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to say to that. Sorry didn't fix 9 years. Sorry didn't give me back watching my kid grow up. How long have you known? I asked. She went quiet. Mom, how long? I suspected, she whispered. For a while now. But Lennox swore it wasn't true. I told her everything. The phone calls from Celeste. The ambush at my apartment. The harassment at restaurants. The office incident with my boss on the video call. The fake legal papers Lennox brought. The GoFundMe with my name and photo. The family invasion that lasted 5 hours. The testing kit that appeared 8 minutes after I agreed. The perfect match results that made no sense until tonight. Mom listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Have you met him? Met who? The boy. Oliver. Her voice was so soft. I felt something twist in my chest. Number. Not really. Just saw him at my office that one time. You should meet him, she said. Mom, I can't handle this right now, but he's your son. He's dying. I hung up on her. I couldn't hear that. Couldn't process that there was a 9-year-old kid with my face who was dying, and I was supposed to just what? Donate a kidney? Play dad? Pretend the last 9 years didn't happen? I didn't sleep. When morning came, I called my boss. First time I'd called in sick in 3 years. My phone buzzed an hour later with a text from him. Everything okay after yesterday's incident with the woman and child? Let me know if you need anything. I stared at that message. My entire office knew some version of this mess now. They'd all seen Celeste bring that kid to my desk. They'd all heard her tell him I could save his life. They'd all watched me say no to a dying child's face. What did they think of me? I wanted to disappear, delete my phone, move to another city, start over where nobody knew about any of this. Someone knocked on my door around noon. I almost didn't answer, but then I heard Wayne's voice. Hey man, I brought coffee. I opened the door. Wayne Tucker stood there with 2 cups and a bag of food. He's my closest friend from work, has been for 5 years. Come in. He walked past me and set everything on my kitchen counter. I heard about what happened at the office yesterday, with the kid. I sat down hard on my couch. It's worse than you think. So I told him, the whole story from start to finish. Wayne just sat there. Every few minutes he'd mutter what the hell under his breath. When I got to the part about Lennox admitting he'd known the whole time, Wayne's jaw actually dropped. Your own brother? For 9 years? I nodded. Wayne was quiet for a long time. Then he asked the question I'd been avoiding. What are you going to do about the kid? I don't know. My voice came out flat. I'm still trying to process that I have a son. A dying son. Wayne leaned forward. Look, I get it. This is messed up. Like, really messed up. But there's a 9-year-old kid who needs help, and you're the only one who can save him. I put my head in my hands. Everyone keeps saying that. Like it's simple. Like I should just forget about 9 years of lies. It's not about forgetting, Wayne said. It's about a kid who didn't ask for any of this. He didn't lie to you. He doesn't even know you exist. He's just sick and dying. I looked up at Wayne. You think I should do it? He met my eyes. I think you need to figure out if you can live with yourself if you don't. My dad showed up that evening without calling first. I opened the door and he walked right in. His face was red. Dad, we need to talk. He wasn't asking. I've been on the phone with Lennox all day. And Celeste. And your mother. I crossed my arms. And? Dad's voice got louder. And I'm trying to understand how my son could hide something like this from his own brother, from his whole family. I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. You're mad at him. Of course I'm mad at him. Dad started pacing the same path I'd worn into my carpet the night before. I always thought something was weird about how fast he and Celeste got together after you two broke up, but I never imagined this. He stopped and looked at me. 9 years. He looked me in the eye at Christmas and Thanksgiving and birthdays and lied. Lennox called me this morning, Dad said. His voice got quieter, crying, begging me to convince you to help. I waited. He admitted everything. Said Celeste told him she was pregnant right after you two split. Said she didn't want you to know. Said he agreed to raise the boy as his own because he loved her and wanted to be a father. Dad's voice cracked on the last word. I watched my father's face crumble. One of my sons lied to this family for 9 years, and now the other son has to decide if he's going to save a child's life. How am I supposed to process that? I didn't have an answer. Neither of us did. We just stood there in my apartment while the weight of it all pressed down on us. Dad stood there for another minute before he grabbed his coat from my couch. He walked to the door and turned back to look at me. His eyes were red and tired. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something else, but nothing came out. Then he just nodded once and left. I heard his footsteps in the hallway getting quieter until my apartment was silent. I sat down on my couch and stared at the wall. My phone buzzed with another text from someone in my family, but I didn't look at it. I couldn't deal with anyone else's opinions right now. Around 10 that night, I gave up trying to sleep and opened my laptop. I typed in kidney donation and started reading. The first website was from a medical center, and it had a whole section about living donors. I learned that you could live a normal life with 1 kidney, because 1 kidney could do the work of 2, but the surgery itself had risks. Bleeding, infection, blood clots, damage to nearby organs. The recovery time was 6 to 8 weeks before you could go back to normal activities. I clicked on another site that talked about long-term effects. Most donors did fine, but there was a small chance of high blood pressure or kidney disease years later. Some donors had chronic pain at the surgery site. I kept reading for hours, my eyes burning from the screen. Every website said the same thing. It was generally safe, but there were risks. No surgery was completely safe. Around 3 in the morning, I found myself typing Celeste's name and GoFundMe into the search bar. Someone had archived the page before she took it down. I scrolled through it and felt sick. The title was still there at the top. Help us convince him to save a dying child. She had used a photo of me from my company website. Below that was her whole story about how I was a perfect match, but refused to help. The comments section had over 200 responses. Monster. Heartless. How can you let a child die? I hope karma gets you. Someone wrote that they hoped I got kidney disease myself, so I'd know how it felt. Another person said I should be forced to donate. A woman wrote 3 paragraphs about how her son died waiting for a transplant and how people like me were murderers. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. These people didn't know anything about the situation. They didn't know about the lies or the manipulation or the 9 years of deception, but they were all convinced I was evil. The next morning, someone knocked on my door around 8. I was still on the couch where I'd fallen asleep. I opened the door, and my mom was standing there with a bag of breakfast food and a photo album under her arm. She walked in without asking and set everything on my kitchen counter. I could smell the coffee and bagels, but I wasn't hungry. Mom sat down at my table and opened the photo album. She patted the chair next to her. I sat down, and she turned the album so I could see. The first picture was Celeste pregnant. She was maybe 6 months along, wearing a blue dress, smiling at the camera. I'd never seen this picture before. Mom flipped the page, and there was a newborn baby in a hospital blanket. Then more pictures. The baby at maybe 6 months old, a toddler taking his first steps, a little boy at what looked like a family Christmas party, and I recognized my parents' house in the background. I looked at Mom. She had tears running down her face. She told me she'd been keeping this album separate from the others. She said she suspected the truth, but Lennox made her promise not to say anything. He told her it would destroy the family if anyone found out. I stood up fast enough that my chair scraped against the floor. I asked her how long she'd known. She said she didn't know for sure until a few days ago when Lennox admitted everything, but she'd suspected for years. She thought she was protecting everyone by staying quiet. I told her she wasn't protecting me. She wasn't protecting the kid either. We both deserved to know the truth. Mom started crying harder and said she was sorry. She said Lennox convinced her that telling the truth would tear the family apart, and she thought keeping the secret was the right thing to do. She kept saying she was sorry over and over. I sat back down because I was too tired to stay angry. Mom flipped to the back of the album and pulled out a loose photo. She slid it across the table to me. It was recent, maybe from last week. A boy in a hospital bed, pale and thin with tubes in his arm. But I could see my eyes looking back at me from that photo. My nose, even the same weird cowlick in his hair that I'd always hated on myself. Mom's voice was quiet when she said that was him now. That was my son. I picked up the photo and stared at it. This wasn't some abstract concept anymore. This was a real kid who looked like me, who had my features, who was dying while I sat here being angry. Mom asked if I would at least meet him, just once. I didn't have to decide anything about the donation, but she thought I should see him in person. I said fine, but only at the hospital with medical staff there, and it didn't mean I'd decided anything. Mom nodded fast and said she'd set it up for tomorrow. She hugged me before she left and took the breakfast food with her because I still hadn't touched it. I spent the rest of that day and all night thinking about that photo. I barely slept, just kept rehearsing what I might say to a 9-year-old who didn't know I existed. The next afternoon, I drove to the hospital. Mom had texted me the room number and floor. I found the transplant coordinator's office first because that's what Mom had arranged. The coordinator was a woman in her 40s, professional and calm. She sat me down and explained the whole process without any guilt trips or emotional manipulation. She said the child had weeks at most, maybe just days. His kidney function was at 15% and dropping. She confirmed I was an unusually perfect match, which explained why they'd rushed the test results. The timing made more sense now. It was urgent. She asked if I wanted to know the child's name before I met him. I realized I'd never asked. Through this whole nightmare, I'd never once asked what my son was called. The coordinator told me his name was Oliver. Something about hearing the name made him real in a different way, not just the boy or the kid. Oliver, a person with a name. The coordinator walked me to his room on the pediatric floor. When we got there, Celeste and Lennox were both inside. I could see them through the window. The coordinator knocked and asked them to step out. Lennox started to argue, but Celeste grabbed his arm and pulled him into the hallway. They both looked terrified when they walked past me. They knew this meeting would determine if their son lived or died. I walked into the room and saw him for the first time. Oliver was smaller than I thought he'd be, way thinner than a 9-year-old should be. His skin was pale, almost gray, and he had tubes running from his arm to an IV pole next to the bed. He was sitting up, playing some kind of handheld game console, his thumbs moving fast over the buttons. When the door opened, he looked up at me and smiled. It was my smile, the exact same crooked grin I saw in the mirror every morning. My chest felt tight. The coordinator stepped forward and gestured toward me. She told Oliver I was a friend who might be able to help with his situation. Oliver's smile got bigger, and he said hi in this quiet voice. I managed to say hi back even though I couldn't stop staring at his face. He had my eyes, my nose, even that stupid cowlick in his hair that I'd always hated on myself. This was real. This wasn't some abstract concept anymore. This was a kid who looked exactly like me, sitting in a hospital bed with tubes in his arm. The coordinator pulled up a chair for me and then stepped back to give us space. I sat down and asked Oliver what game he was playing. He lit up and started explaining the whole plot, talking about characters and levels and boss fights. His hands moved while he talked, showing me combos and special moves. I asked questions about the game and he answered each one, getting more excited as he went. We talked about his favorite foods next. He said he missed pizza more than anything, that the hospital food was terrible. He did this impression of one of his nurses, making his voice all high and bossy, saying he had to eat his vegetables. I laughed without meaning to. He was funny, smart too. He told me about his school, about his teacher and his friends, and how he used to play soccer before he got too sick. He said he missed recess the most, running around outside with his friends. Now he just stayed in this room all day, playing games and watching TV. 20 minutes went by without me noticing. He kept talking and I kept listening, and for those 20 minutes I almost forgot why I was there. Then Oliver looked right at me and asked if I was going to give him my kidney. I froze. The coordinator started to move forward, probably to stop the conversation, but Oliver kept talking. He said his mom told him there was someone who was a perfect match, but that person hadn't decided yet. He looked at me with those eyes that were exactly like mine and said he understood if I was scared. He said he was scared too. The surgery sounded scary and he didn't like hospitals, but he really wanted to go home and play soccer again. I didn't know what to say. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. The coordinator finally stepped in and said that was a conversation for another time. Oliver nodded and went back to his game, but I could see him glancing at me every few seconds, waiting for an answer I couldn't give. I left the hospital 15 minutes later without telling anyone what I'd decided, because I hadn't decided anything. I just kept seeing Oliver's face, that smile that was my smile, those eyes that were my eyes. I drove home in silence and sat in my apartment staring at the wall. My phone rang around 7 that evening. It was Wayne. I answered and he asked how the meeting went. I told him everything. How Oliver looked like me, how he was funny and smart, how he asked me directly about the kidney. Wayne was quiet for a minute, and then asked if I'd thought about what it would feel like to know I let my own kid die. Even if I didn't know he existed until a few days ago, I'd still know for the rest of my life that I could have saved him and didn't. I told Wayne I needed to go and hung up. The next morning, my phone rang again. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. A man's voice said my name, and then identified himself as Jack Lombardi, Celeste's father. I hadn't talked to him since the breakup 15 years ago. His voice was rough, angry. He said he was mad at Celeste for lying all these years, but he was desperate. His grandson was dying and I was the only one who could save him. Then he said he'd give me $50,000 to donate the kidney, cash, no questions asked. I felt my face get hot. I told him this wasn't about money. That insulted me more than anything else they'd done. He thought he could just buy my kidney like I was selling a car. I started to hang up, but he kept talking fast, apologizing. He said he was just scared. He'd watched Oliver suffer for months while they searched for a match. He'd seen his grandson get weaker every day. He didn't know what else to do. I told Jack that if I decided to do this, it wouldn't be because of money or pressure or manipulation. It would be because I decided it was the right thing to do, and I needed time to figure that out on my own. He went quiet, and then apologized again. He said he understood. He said he was just a terrified grandfather who couldn't stand watching Oliver die. He'd seen the kid go from playing soccer to barely being able to walk across a room. He admitted he was grasping at anything that might help. I told him I'd let them know when I made my decision, and hung up. That afternoon, I met with a lawyer to understand what my legal situation was. I needed to know where I stood regarding parental rights. The lawyer was a woman in her 40s who listened to my whole story without interrupting. When I finished, she explained that Lennox was listed as the father on Oliver's birth certificate. He'd been raising Oliver for 9 years. Legally, he had full custody. If I wanted parental rights, I'd have to prove paternity through a DNA test and then petition the court. That process could take months. She looked at me seriously and said, Oliver didn't have months based on what I'd told her about his condition. So even if I was the biological father, I had no legal rights to him right now. Then the lawyer pulled out the papers Lennox had showed me, the ones about failure to render aid. She looked them over and shook her head. She said they were completely fake. The court letterhead was wrong. The legal language didn't match any real statute. There was no law that said I had to donate an organ to anyone, not even my own child. Organ donation had to be voluntary, or hospitals wouldn't accept it. She said Lennox had basically created fake legal documents to scare me into agreeing. I felt angry all over again at the manipulation, but I also felt relieved. This meant whatever decision I made, it was truly my choice. No one could force me legally. No one could sue me. I was making this decision completely freely. I scheduled a consultation with a different transplant surgeon the next day. I wanted an independent medical opinion about the risks, not just information from the hospital where Oliver was treated. The surgeon was older, maybe in his 60s, and he was straightforward with me. He said the surgery was generally safe. Thousands of people donated kidneys every year, and most of them recovered fine. But there were risks. Complications during surgery were rare but possible. I'd need 6 to 8 weeks of recovery time before I could go back to normal activities. Long term, most donors lived completely normal lives, but there was a small increased risk of kidney disease later in life, especially if I developed diabetes or high blood pressure. He wanted me to understand all the facts before I made any decisions. The surgeon asked me about my relationship with the person who would receive the kidney. I told him the whole messy story, about Celeste and the breakup, about finding out Oliver was my son, about the 9 years of lies, about all the manipulation and pressure. He listened without saying anything, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said he'd seen a lot of complicated family situations in transplant medicine over the years, but this was definitely unique. He told me that donation had to be my choice, made freely without any pressure. If the hospital ethics board thought I was forced or manipulated, they wouldn't approve the transplant. It had to be my decision, and mine alone. I thanked him for being honest, and left his office with a lot to think about. I spent the next 3 days at my apartment, avoiding everyone. Wayne called me twice a day until I finally picked up on Thursday morning. He told me hiding at home was making everything worse, and I needed to come back to work. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. I argued that everyone knew something happened, and it would be awkward. He said it was already awkward, and sitting alone wasn't helping anyone. I agreed to come in Friday. My first day back felt strange. People glanced at me when I walked to my desk. Nobody asked questions directly, but I could feel them watching. Around 10, my boss called me into his office. He closed the door and asked if I needed time off to deal with the family emergency. I appreciated that he called it that instead of asking what happened. I told him I was okay to work, and he nodded and said to let him know if that changed. At lunch, I sat alone in the break room eating a sandwich. A woman from accounting I barely knew sat down across from me. She said she saw the GoFundMe before Celeste took it down. My stomach dropped. She quickly added that she didn't donate to it because the whole thing seemed manipulative. Instead, she donated to childhood cancer research in Oliver's name. I stared at her for a second, then thanked her. She smiled and said, "Not everyone believed what they read online." After she left, I sat there feeling something shift inside me. Not everyone had judged me based on Celeste's version of events. That evening, someone knocked on my door. I opened it expecting Wayne or maybe my parents. Nadine stood there alone, looking tired and sad. She asked if she could come in. I let her inside and we sat in my living room. Unlike her husband's anger or Celeste's manipulation, Nadine just seemed heartbroken. She told me she didn't know about the paternity deception until recently. She said she was ashamed of her daughter's choices. Then she asked me to please consider helping Oliver. Not for Celeste or Lennox, but for an innocent child who didn't deserve to die because adults made terrible decisions. I didn't say anything at first. Nadine pulled out her phone and asked if she could show me something. I nodded. She opened her photo app and started playing videos. The first one showed Oliver at his 5th birthday party. He was laughing and blowing out candles while other kids cheered. The second video was his first day of school. He wore a backpack almost as big as he was and waved at the camera. The third was from a soccer game last year. Oliver ran down the field and kicked the ball into the goal, then jumped up and down, celebrating. In every video, he looked full of energy and life, so different from the pale, sick child I met in the hospital. Nadine was showing me who Oliver was before the illness. It was working because I could see the life being stolen from him. I told Nadine I was leaning toward doing the donation. She looked up with hope in her eyes, but I said I needed to set serious boundaries about what happened after. I wouldn't be manipulated into playing happy family with people who lied to me for 9 years. Nadine agreed immediately. She said she would support whatever boundaries I needed as long as Oliver got the help he needed. She left 20 minutes later and I sat on my couch thinking about those videos. The next day, I called Lennox. I told him we needed to talk, just the two of us. He agreed right away. We met at a coffee shop neither of us usually went to, a neutral location where we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. Lennox arrived first and was sitting at a corner table when I walked in. The tension between us felt thick. I sat down across from him and we both just stared at each other for a moment. Lennox started apologizing, but I cut him off. I told him I needed to understand why he agreed to this deception in the first place. He was quiet for a long time. Then he admitted that he loved Celeste from the moment he met her at my apartment years ago. When she told him she was pregnant with my child, he saw it as an opportunity. He thought if he helped her raise the baby, she would eventually love him back. I asked him if he ever considered how wrong it was to let me miss my own child's entire life. Lennox's face crumpled, and he started crying right there in the coffee shop. He said he'd thought about it every day for 9 years, especially at big moments like Oliver's first word or first day of school. He said he convinced himself he was doing the right thing because I'd made it clear I never wanted kids, and he desperately wanted to be a father. I watched my brother cry and felt angry and sad at the same time. Lennox wiped his eyes and told me that Oliver was the best thing that ever happened to him, that he loved that boy more than anything in the world. He said he knew he didn't deserve forgiveness, but he was begging me to save Oliver's life. I told him I was considering the donation, but our relationship as brothers was permanently damaged, and I didn't know if I could ever trust him again. He nodded and said he understood. We sat there for another minute in silence, then I left. That night I called my parents. I told them I'd decided to move forward with the donation process. My mom started crying immediately. My dad asked what made me decide. I told them it wasn't about forgiving Celeste or Lennox. It was about Oliver, who didn't ask to be born into this mess and didn't deserve to die because the adults in his life made terrible choices. My dad was quiet for a moment, then said he was proud of me. We talked for another hour about next steps and what the process would look like. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling like I'd just made the biggest decision of my life. The next morning, I called the hospital and asked for the transplant coordinator. She answered on the second ring, and I told her I was ready to move forward with the evaluation process. Her voice shifted from professional to warm, and she said she was glad to hear from me. She explained that we needed to schedule a full medical workup for the following week, blood tests to check my kidney function and overall health, imaging scans to look at my kidney structure, a psychological evaluation to make sure I understood what I was doing, and meetings with the hospital ethics board to review the whole situation. She warned me this would take at least 2 weeks to complete all the steps. Then her voice got quieter, and she said Oliver's condition was getting worse, and she wasn't sure how much time we had. I told her to schedule everything as fast as possible. She said she'd call me back within an hour with appointment times. I spent that hour cleaning my apartment because I needed something to do with my hands. She called back and rattled off a list of dates and times. Blood work on Tuesday morning. CT scan, Tuesday afternoon. Psychological evaluation Thursday. Ethics board meeting the following Monday. I wrote everything down on a notepad and stared at the list after we hung up. This was really happening. Tuesday morning, I showed up at the hospital lab at 7:30 for blood work. The technician tied a rubber band around my arm and stuck a needle in my vein. She filled 6 different tubes with my blood while making small talk about the weather. I watched my blood flow into the tubes and thought about how soon some of it would be keeping Oliver alive. The CT scan that afternoon took longer. I had to drink this chalky liquid that tasted like metal and lie completely still in a tube while the machine buzzed around me. The technician's voice came through a speaker telling me when to hold my breath. The whole thing took 40 minutes, and I kept thinking about Oliver lying in the hospital beds for months, going through worse tests than this. Thursday came, and I drove to the hospital for my psychological evaluation. The therapist was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and kind eyes. She sat across from me in a small office and asked me to explain the situation in my own words. I told her everything. The phone call from Celeste, the harassment and manipulation, the office ambush, the GoFundMe, finding out Oliver was my son, the 9 years of lies. She took notes while I talked, and her face stayed neutral. When I finished, she asked me directly if I was forced or pressured into this donation. I looked at her and said honestly that yes, there had been massive pressure and manipulation attempts, but I was choosing this freely now because I couldn't live with myself if I let my son die. She asked me if I understood the risks of the surgery. I told her I'd researched everything and knew what I was getting into. She asked if I expected anything in return for the donation. I said no, I just wanted Oliver to live. She wrote more notes and then looked up at me and said she believed I was making an informed, voluntary choice. She would recommend approval to the ethics board. I left her office feeling lighter somehow. The following Monday, I sat in a conference room facing 5 people on the ethics board. 3 doctors, a hospital administrator, and a patient advocate. They had thick folders in front of them with all my test results and evaluation reports. The lead doctor, an older man with white hair, asked me to describe my relationship with Celeste. I explained we dated 15 years ago and broke up. He asked about my relationship with Lennox. I said he was my brother, but our relationship was damaged now because of his role in hiding Oliver from me. Another board member, a woman with glasses, asked detailed questions about the manipulation attempts. I told them about the office incident, the fake legal papers, the family ambush, all of it. I could see concern on their faces as I talked. The patient advocate asked if I felt I had a choice in this decision. I said yes. I could walk away right now if I wanted to. But I was choosing to help because Oliver was my son and he was innocent in all this mess. The lead doctor said they needed to be absolutely certain I wasn't being pressured because coerced donations often lead to serious psychological problems for the donor later. I understood what he meant. If I did this feeling forced, I might resent Oliver or myself for years. But I'd worked through that already. This was my choice now. They asked me to wait outside while they discussed. I sat in the hallway for 30 minutes checking my phone and trying not to think about what would happen if they said no. Finally, they called me back in. The lead doctor said they were prepared to approve the donation, but they needed another week to finalize paperwork and coordinate with the surgical team. I nodded and thanked them. 3 days later, my phone rang at 11 at night. It was Celeste, and she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Oliver's condition had gotten suddenly worse. His kidney function had dropped drastically. They'd moved him to intensive care. The doctors said he might not have the weeks they originally thought, maybe days. I told her I was coming to the hospital right now. I threw on clothes and drove there going 20 over the speed limit the whole way. I found the ICU on the 4th floor, and a nurse directed me to Oliver's room. Celeste and Lennox were standing outside the room, and Celeste's face was red and swollen from crying. I walked past them without speaking and went inside. Oliver was unconscious on the bed surrounded by machines, tubes in his arms, wires connected to monitors, a breathing tube in his mouth. The monitors beeped steadily, showing his heart rate and oxygen levels. His face was gray, and his chest rose and fell with the ventilator. I stood there looking at my son and realized we were running out of time. A doctor came in and introduced himself as Oliver's nephrologist. He explained that Oliver's remaining kidney function had crashed and his body was filling with toxins. They had him on dialysis, but it was only buying time. Without a transplant very soon, maybe a week at most, Oliver would die. I asked if the ethics board could speed up their approval. The doctor said he would contact them immediately about the emergency situation. I sat in a chair next to Oliver's bed and watched him breathe. Celeste came in and stood on the other side of the bed. She didn't say anything, just put her hand on Oliver's arm. We stayed like that for 2 hours, until a nurse came in and said the ethics board had been contacted and would meet in the morning. The next day, the ethics board gave emergency approval for the donation. The lead doctor called me personally to tell me. He said, given Oliver's critical condition and their determination that I was making a free choice despite the complicated circumstances, they were approving the surgery. It was scheduled for 3 days later. That gave just enough time for final preparations and pre-surgery protocols. I asked when I could see Oliver again. The doctor said he was still in intensive care but stable enough for short visits. I went to the hospital that afternoon. Oliver was awake this time, though he looked weak and tired. I'd asked Celeste and Lennox to stay away. I wanted to talk to him alone. I pulled a chair up next to his bed and sat down. Oliver looked at me with those eyes that were exactly like mine. I told him I was going to give him my kidney. He was quiet for a moment and then asked why I was helping him when we just met. I didn't know how to explain everything, so I just said, sometimes people help each other because it's the right thing to do. It felt like a cop-out answer, but I didn't know what else to say. He seemed to accept it, though. Oliver asked if I would come visit him after the surgery. I promised him I would. He told me he was scared of the surgery. I admitted I was scared too. We sat together for a while after that, not talking, just existing in the same space. I felt something shift inside me. This connection I didn't expect. This was my son. Regardless of all the lies and manipulation and betrayal, he mattered to me. His life mattered. I stayed until a nurse came in to check his vitals and said he needed to rest. The day before surgery, my whole family showed up at the hospital. My parents came first, then my other siblings, then aunts and uncles I hadn't seen in months. Everyone crowded into the family waiting area on Oliver's floor. People were hugging me and crying and saying they were proud of me. It felt overwhelming, like this was both a funeral and a celebration at the same time. The emotional intensity made my head hurt. Lennox stayed in the background the whole time. I noticed he couldn't look me in the eye. He kept his distance and talked quietly with Celeste in the corner. My mom kept touching my face and telling me everything would be okay. My dad stood next to me with his hand on my shoulder like he was afraid I might disappear. After an hour of this, I needed air. I went outside to the parking lot and just stood there breathing. That evening, Celeste found me in the hospital cafeteria. She asked if we could talk privately. I almost said no, but something in her face made me agree. We went to an empty conference room down the hall. Celeste sat across from me and said she knew nothing she could say would make up for what she'd done, but she wanted me to understand why she made the choices she did. She explained that when she found out she was pregnant 15 years ago, she was terrified. We'd just broken up. She didn't know what to do. When Lennox found out and offered to help raise the baby, it seemed like the perfect solution. I didn't want kids. Lennox desperately did. It seemed like everyone would be better off. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I told her that her reasoning didn't matter. She stole 9 years of my son's life from me. She stole 9 years of Oliver knowing his real father. Those years were gone, and nothing could bring them back. Celeste started crying. Real crying, not the manipulative kind from before. She said she knew, that she'd lived with the guilt every single day, that she'd watched Oliver grow up and wondered constantly if she'd made the right choice. She said after the surgery, if I wanted to be part of Oliver's life, she wouldn't fight me on it. She would tell him the truth about who I was. I didn't say anything to that. I just stood up and left the room. Tomorrow they would cut me open and take out one of my kidneys. Tomorrow Oliver would get a chance to live. Everything else could wait until after that. The morning of surgery, I woke up at 5 and couldn't eat anything because of the pre-op rules. A nurse came to my room at 6 to start the IV and go over the consent forms one last time. She had me initial about 15 different spots on the paperwork. Each one felt heavier than the last. The surgeon came in around 7 and explained the whole procedure again. He drew a diagram on the whiteboard showing which kidney they'd take and how they'd remove it. He said the surgery would take about 4 hours and I'd wake up in recovery. I signed the final consent form and they wheeled me down to pre-op. The room was cold and bright. Other patients were separated by curtains. I could hear someone crying 2 beds over. A different nurse came and gave me something to help me relax. She said it would make me feel floaty. It did. While I waited for them to take me back, I kept thinking about how in 24 hours part of me would be inside Oliver, keeping him alive. The thought scared me and felt important at the same time. They came to get me around 8:30. The last thing I remember is the anesthesiologist telling me to count backward from 10. I made it to 7. I woke up and everything hurt. My whole left side felt like someone had torn it open, which I guess they had. The recovery room was dim, and I couldn't focus my eyes right. A nurse was checking my blood pressure. She saw me looking around and told me the surgery went perfectly. 4 hours like they said. The kidney was already working in Oliver's body. She said that was really good news. My parents were there when I could see straight. Mom was crying but smiling at the same time. Dad stood next to the bed and squeezed my hand. He didn't say anything, just squeezed. The pain medication made everything fuzzy, but I remember feeling relieved it was over. Mom kept touching my face and telling me I did a good thing. I wanted to tell her it didn't feel good yet. It just felt like pain, but the drugs made talking hard, so I just closed my eyes. The first 2 days were worse than I expected. The pain was intense, like someone was stabbing my side every time I breathed. I couldn't move without help. A nurse had to hold me up just to use the bathroom. That was embarrassing. I couldn't sleep more than an hour at a time because every position hurt. Wayne showed up on the second day with magazines and a bag of snacks I couldn't eat yet. He sat in the chair next to my bed and made jokes about how I was a hero, even though I was just lying there complaining. I told him heroes probably don't cry when they try to sit up. He laughed and said heroes probably do. The nurses kept telling me Oliver was doing great. His body accepted the kidney right away. His numbers were better than anyone expected. They said he'd probably leave the hospital before me. That made the pain feel worth it, sort of. On the third day, they wheeled me down to see Oliver. I was still in a hospital gown and connected to an IV pole. A nurse pushed my wheelchair through 3 hallways to get to his room. He was in a regular room now, not intensive care anymore. When I came through the door, he was sitting up in bed playing a video game. He had color in his face, real color, not the gray pale look from before. When he saw me, he smiled, that same smile I'd seen in the mirror my whole life. He put down the game and said, "Thank you for saving his life." Just like that, simple, direct. I had to look at the wall because my eyes were getting wet. I didn't want him to see me cry, but I couldn't help it. Something about seeing him healthy broke something loose in my chest. Oliver asked why I was crying. I wiped my face and told him I was just happy he was okay. He nodded like that made sense. Then he said his mom told him we were going to talk about something important after we both felt better. He seemed curious but not scared, just interested, like she'd promised him a surprise. I realized right then that Celeste was planning to tell him I'm his biological father. My stomach dropped. I had no idea how he'd react to that. Would he be angry? Confused? Would he hate me for not being there his whole life? I looked at him playing his game and felt scared in a way the surgery hadn't scared me. This was different. This would change everything. Over the next week, both of us kept recovering. I had physical therapy every day to help me get my strength back. A therapist would come to my room and make me walk the hallways. At first, I could barely make it to the door. By day 5, I could do 2 laps around the floor. The pain went from stabbing to a deep ache, more manageable. I could breathe without wanting to scream. The transplant team came by every morning to check on me. They were excited about how well Oliver's body was accepting the kidney. His numbers were better than they expected for this stage. They said he was already talking about going back to the school, wanting to play soccer again. The doctors kept using words like remarkable and exceptional. I just felt tired and sore. 2 weeks after surgery, Celeste and Lennox asked me to meet with a family therapist. I almost said no, but they said it was to plan how to tell Oliver the truth. I agreed, because he deserved to know. The therapist was a woman in her 40s with gray hair. She sat us down in a conference room and asked questions about Oliver, what he knew, what he didn't know, how we thought he'd react. She helped us figure out how to explain everything in a way a 9-year-old could understand. We decided to tell him I'm his biological father, but Lennox is his dad in every way that matters, that nothing about his family would change. He'd just have one more person who cared about him. The therapist said to expect confusion and questions, maybe anger. She said to be honest and patient. Let him process at his own speed. Telling Oliver was one of the hardest things I've ever done. We all sat in his hospital room, me and Lennox and Celeste. Oliver was playing his game when we came in. Celeste asked him to turn it off. She said we needed to talk about something important. He looked nervous then, put the game down slow. Celeste started by saying she'd made a mistake a long time ago by not telling him something. Oliver looked at me, then at Lennox, then back at Celeste. She told him I was his biological father, that I didn't know about him until recently. Oliver's face went confused. He asked why nobody told him before. His voice got higher, almost crying. Lennox explained that they made a mistake by keeping it secret, that they were sorry. Oliver stared at me for a long time. Then he asked if I was going to try to take him away from Lennox. My throat got tight. I promised him that Lennox was his dad, that nothing would change that. I said I just wanted to know him if he'd let me. Oliver didn't say anything, just looked down at his hands. Oliver didn't talk much for a few days after that. He was quiet when I visited, polite but distant. I didn't push him, just sat with him while he played games or watched TV. On the 4th day, he asked if he could call me by my first name instead of calling me Lennox's brother. I said yes. That felt like progress. Over the next week, he started testing things out. He'd ask Lennox about homework, then ask me about video games, like he was figuring out how to have 2 father figures, building something separate with me, different from what he had with Lennox. It was slow and careful, but it was happening. He'd tell me about school stuff, about his friends, About the soccer team he wanted to join when he was healthy enough. I'd listen and ask questions. We were building something. I didn't know what yet, but it was real. A month after surgery, the doctors cleared me to go back to work. I had restrictions on heavy lifting for another month. No carrying anything over 15 pounds. My boss welcomed me back and said the whole office had been following Oliver's recovery. People kept asking him how we were doing. When I got to my desk, there were cards from coworkers I barely knew. Get well soon messages. Some had donated to kidney disease research in Oliver's name. Several people stopped by my desk that first day. They said what I did was incredible, that I was brave. I didn't know what to say to that. I just felt uncomfortable, like they were seeing me as some kind of hero. But I wasn't. I was just a guy who did what felt right, what I had to do. The attention made my skin itch. I wanted to tell them it wasn't that simple, that the whole situation was complicated and messy. But I just said thank you and tried to focus on my work. A week later, Lennox texted asking if we could meet for coffee. I stared at the message for 10 minutes before responding. We met at a place neither of us usually went to, a small shop downtown with uncomfortable metal chairs. He was already there when I arrived, looking nervous and tired. We sat across from each other and didn't speak for almost 5 minutes. Finally, he asked how I was feeling after the surgery. I told him I was fine. He nodded. The silence stretched out again. I asked him why he wanted to meet. He said he thought we should try to talk regularly for Oliver's sake. I didn't want to, but I agreed. We decided on Wednesdays at 7. That first meeting lasted 20 minutes and felt like hours. The next week was the same. Awkward pauses, careful words, me getting angry about something he said, him getting defensive. But we kept showing up. By the 4th week, we could almost have a normal conversation about Oliver's soccer practice or his favorite video game. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just two people trying to exist in the same space without exploding. Sometimes I'd look at him and remember he stole 9 years from me. Other times I'd see how much he genuinely loved Oliver, and that made it slightly easier. We were building something. I didn't know what, but it was better than the hatred that had been there before. Around the same time, I sat down with Celeste at a coffee shop near her house. I told her exactly what I wanted. I wasn't trying to be Oliver's dad in the way Lennox was, but I wanted to be present for important moments. School events, doctor appointments, family gatherings. She agreed immediately. She said she'd include me in everything and promised no more manipulation or pressure about anything. I made it clear that if she ever pulled anything like the GoFundMe or the office ambush again, I was done completely. She nodded and said she understood. She looked different from she had during all the chaos. Calmer, less desperate. She thanked me again for saving Oliver's life. I just nodded. We weren't friends. We'd never be friends, but we could work together for Oliver. That's all that mattered. 3 months after the surgery, I went with Celeste and Lennox to Oliver's follow-up appointment. The transplant doctor came in with a huge smile. She said the kidney function was excellent, better than they'd hoped. Oliver's body had accepted the transplant perfectly. He was officially cleared to return to the school full-time, to rejoin his soccer team, to be a normal 9-year-old again. Oliver pumped his fist in the air when she said soccer. Celeste started crying. Lennox hugged her. I stood there watching my son celebrate being healthy and felt something shift in my chest. This was real. He was going to be okay. The doctor said Oliver would need regular checkups and medication for life, but compared to dialysis and being constantly sick, this was everything. Oliver turned to me and said thanks again. I told him he didn't need to keep thanking me. He grinned and said he'd thank me every time he scored a soccer goal then. A few weeks later, Oliver asked Celeste if he could spend a weekend at my apartment. She looked at Lennox. He looked at me. I said I was okay with it if they were. We set it up for the following Saturday. I spent the entire week making sure my apartment was ready. I bought snacks he'd like, made sure I had games he'd want to play. When Celeste dropped him off on Saturday morning, I was more nervous than I'd been before the surgery, but Oliver walked in like he'd been there 100 times. He dumped his backpack on my couch and asked what games I had. We spent the weekend playing video games and watching movies. He talked about school and his friends and his favorite superhero. I listened and asked questions and made jokes that made him laugh. Sunday night, when Celeste came to pick him up, Oliver hugged me before leaving. It felt natural, like we'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. After he left, I sat on my couch and realized I'd just had a normal weekend with my son. It wasn't complicated or painful. It was just good. My mom called a few days later. She said she wanted to have dinner with me, just the two of us. We met at a restaurant near my apartment. She looked at me for a long time before speaking. Then she apologized again for keeping the secret. I told her I understood she was in an impossible situation, that Lennox had put her there. She said she'd been watching me with Oliver over the past few months, that she could see I was really trying to build something with him. She was proud of me. My dad called the next day and said basically the same thing, that he was proud of how I'd handled everything, that I could have walked away after the donation, but instead, I chose to step up and be present in Oliver's life. Hearing that from him meant more than I expected. 6 months after the surgery, our family had found a new normal. Oliver knew the truth about everything now. He seemed comfortable having both Lennox and me in his life. I saw him twice a week, Tuesday nights for dinner at Celeste's house, Saturday afternoons for whatever activity he wanted to do. Sometimes we went to the park, sometimes we got ice cream, sometimes we just hung out at my apartment. He started introducing me to his friends as his biological dad. The first time he did it, I froze, but he said it so casually that his friends just nodded and moved on. To them, it was just another fact about Oliver. He had 2 dads, one who raised him and one who gave him a kidney. They thought that was cool. Lennox and I kept meeting every Wednesday. We'd never have the relationship we had before. That was gone forever. But we found a way to coexist peacefully. We could be in the same room without tension. We could coordinate Oliver's schedule without fighting. Sometimes we even laughed about something together. It wasn't forgiveness. I didn't know if I'd ever fully forgive him, but it was functional. We could work together for Oliver's sake. That was enough. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized something. Despite all the lies and manipulation and betrayal, something good came out of it. I had a son I didn't know existed. He was alive and healthy because I made the choice to help him. Our family was complicated and messy. Nothing about this situation was normal or ideal, but Oliver was thriving. He was playing soccer again, getting good grades, making jokes, being a regular kid, and I got to be part of his life going forward. That didn't erase the pain of what was stolen from me. Those 9 years were gone forever. I'd never get to see his first steps, or hear his first words, or take him to his first day of school, but I had now. I had the chance to build something with him from this point forward, and right now, that felt like enough. Well, that's the dramatic ending to an otherwise average story. If you made it this far, I both admire and worry about you. Go ahead and subscribe, because clearly you enjoy this chaos. See you in the next one.